So may I remind everyone present that the meeting is being live streamed as well as recorded via the internet, and then this recording is archived for future viewing. Just a few housekeeping rules really. Could everybody please mute themselves when not speaking, and that then avoids any background noise or feedback when other participants are speaking. If you wish to speak, can you please put your hand up or use the little raise hand, the little yellow hand function as well. And then can we please ensure that all debate is raised verbally and not via the chat function, and this is for the sake of the recording. All right, the chat function may be used to highlight any technical issues, or if you need to grab my attention or the Democratic Services Officer. And you know, we may have a few technical issues tonight, which sometimes does happen with the weather the way it is. So hopefully it won't, but if there are any issues, then if somebody could either just put it in the chat and we'll see how we can get around that. So if anybody's got any difficulty hearing or being heard when they're addressing the committee, then can you let myself know or the Democratic Officer know? And if you have a webcam, then try turning that off, as that may help with the broadband or the Wi-Fi bandwidth. So at least then you can hear and be heard, which means then that obviously you can take a full part in the meeting. So I'd like to welcome everybody to the Environmental Regeneration Scrutiny Committee on Tuesday, the 19th of October. So welcome to all our cabinet members, committee members. We do have public speaker and officers and also guests as well. So I'm going to go straight into the agenda then. So the first item is apologies for absence. Do we have any?
No apologies, Chair. Just had Councillor Sigonano on the phone. She's struggling with the connection, so I'll just try and give her some assistance, but she may join us shortly.
Okay, thank you, Gareth. All right, so item number 2 then, which is to receive the minutes of the meeting held on the 21st of September 2021. Are we happy to agree those minutes? Yes, good, okay. And then item number 3 then, which is to receive declarations of interest, including whipping declarations under the Council's Code of Conduct. So do we have any? Councillor Drake?
I just wanted to say, under the item on biomass, I am actually on the Vale Planning Committee, so I just wanted to record that.
Yeah, that's fine. I know there are a couple of members on this committee, and I will be saying something at the very start, and I know they've been contacted as well.
Myself as well, Chair, Councillor Driscoll.
Okay, thanks, Councillor Driscoll. Okay.
And myself as well.
And Councillor Rowlands, isn't it? Yeah, I think it's probably just as well to do that, and then it covers everybody's backs then, doesn't it? Right, now the first 2 items, number 4 and 5, I'm going to swap them around. I'm going to bring 5 forward, if that's okay with everybody, simply because we've got a public speaker and we've also got a guest speaker as well as part of that. So if everybody's happy, I'm going to bring that forward. Is that okay with everybody? Yeah? Okay. Now, so we're going to take, this is the Barry Biomass Independent Review Report, which is referenced then from Cabinet, which was held on the 27th of September. Just a little bit of housekeeping around that. As already mentioned, we do have a few members on planning, so it's just really advising that if you are on planning, just to be mindful of making any statements or any comments or remarks, just to cover yourselves, because obviously, even though this is an historic report, it's historical. Obviously, planning members do still need to be careful because there are still live issues around that going forward for planning, which don't form part of this report. But I suppose it's just really about keeping your powder dry really around that. So I'm going to hand over. We do have a public speaker. We have Mr. Dennis Clark. So the order I'm going to take this, I'm going to, Debbie Miles, our legal officer, is going to introduce the report. And then we do have Annabelle Graham-Paul, who's here then to answer some technical questions around that report if you have it, or just any questions that we may need some help with around that. Once the report has been dealt with as such, I'm going to bring in the public speaker, Dennis Clark. He will have 3 minutes to speak. And then if any councillors have got any questions just for clarification, And it's not about his views. I think this is about any clarification as to what he has said in that 3 minutes. They then have that opportunity to ask those points then. And then following that, then I'll open it up then obviously to all members of the committee for any discussion or debates. And we do have cabinet members here as well if they wish to come in and to add anything at that point. And then I'll be returning then to Debbie to actually sum up the report and respond then to any questions that have been raised. So I hope that's all fine with everybody, and that's quite clear. So Debbie, I'll hand over to you to introduce the report.
Oh, thank you, Chair. So it's a very comprehensive report, and hopefully members will have the opportunity to consider that in advance. And there are a number of appendices attached as well. As the Chair's mentioned, this has been reported to Cabinet, and it's a reference coming on to this Scrutiny Committee and then also to Planning Committee for consideration. So thank you very much also for that introduction, Chair, because as you've highlighted, there are ongoing matters. And obviously we want members to have the opportunity to participate at future planning committee meetings relating to the biomass matter. So just for some context, so the report, members will be familiar, flows from a resolution from Council in February 2020, when an independent review of the Council's determination of all planning applications relating to the Barry incinerator was requested. And also, as part of that that resolution, resolution 1 was that the council called upon the council to share public concern that an environmental impact assessment had not been undertaken in relation to the Barry incinerator. So that formed also part of the independent review, which you'll appreciate from the overview given within the report of the instructions which went out to the independent barrister that specialises in planning and environmental law, Annabel Graham-Paul, who is with us this evening, if there are any particular questions or any particular aspects that that members feel need clarification. So Appendix 1 attaches Annabel's report. I've summarised in the body of my covering report paragraphs 2(2) through to 2(6). The key, what I see is the key points just to bring to members' attention. Obviously, you've got the detail there from Annabel's report, and then because, of course, the review is really looking backwards, and we're looking at the position as was known as at February 2020, and indeed as at the point when the various matters were being determined and considered by officers. You know, I was conscious that things have moved on since, and I just wanted to then make the report a little bit more rounded. So I've also attached the most recent planning enforcement notice, which was issued last month, and also I've attached the Welsh Government's letter of the 29th of July, just so that it isn't just entirely looking to the past, but also being conscious of what's also ahead of us. So in paragraph 2.2, and I've taken the broad headings which were signposted within the instructions. So we firstly deal with the issue of the environmental impact assessment, and the view was taken, and as I say, being conscious of the position as at the time when officers were considering these matters, the view taken by the barristers that the council and the officers did not act unlawfully in its finding that no EIA was required for the outline permission. And I think it is important to highlight there, and Annabel highlights in paragraph 9 of her paper, that in 2008 the position was, and it was the view of the council, Welsh Government, planning inspector and the Environment Agency that in fact an EIA wasn't required. So I think that is important as we're looking back, just to be mindful of that. The reviewer concludes paragraphs 22 and 23. I hope I'm doing justice to Annabelle's paper, but it concludes that in considering whether judgment was properly reached, requirements in the directive and regulations were taken into account, that in considering the documentation, there is no doubt that the screening lawfully took place and proper judgment was exercised by the council and its officers acting under delegated authority. It's also highlighted that she's came to the conclusion based on, and I have to highlight, I think it was in excess of 10,000 pages of documents, so it was a voluminous set of instructions, that the council and officers acted lawfully in finding that no EIA was required. However, it would have been better practice, Annabelle has identified, to consider the environmental effects in more detail in relation to the particular scheme, rather than placing such reliance on the facts relating to the previous negative screening opinion for the 2008 scheme. Annabelle also comments, and I've highlighted it in paragraph 2.3 of my report, on the issue about the development of national significance and the fact that that regime came in March 2016. So just to be mindful of those timelines. Paragraph 2.4 of my paper picks up the point about the concern about lack of progress in relation to outstanding issues, and paragraph so another point that I particularly wanted to highlight is the letter from Welsh Government, the 29th of opportunity to have regard to back prior to 2020. And in the letter, it's concluded that the development approved under the 2015 outline planning permission was a Schedule 1 development and should have been subject to an EIA. So that's Welsh Government's view on that matter. And also, as highlighted in the letter, paragraph 93 in particular. I'll read from the Welsh Government's letter. It provides, I note in particular that this is an interim decision in an ongoing assessment of the plant's environmental impact. The evidence before me shows that the plant is not likely to have significant effects on the environment while an EIA process is carried out, and I've considered the benefits of suspending operations while undertaking EIA do not outweigh the costs. This leads me to conclude it is not expedient to order discontinuance of the use of the plant while an EIA is undertaken. And then just finally, just to highlight in the Minister's letter, next steps are identified as in relation to the outline planning permission. The Minister intends to undertake public consultation on the environmental statement provided by the developer and has sent a copy of the correspondence to the Council, the LPA and the applicant in relation to planning application, the 2017 planning application. So I think that's what I particularly wanted to highlight at the outset. More than happy to obviously pick up any issues as we go through the discussion on this item, Chair.
Okay, thank you, Debbie. That's really useful. I think you've pulled out the very salient items from that report. Then we do have a public speaker who I'm going to bring in now. He has 3 minutes to speak, and as I've already stated, if any members of the committee have any clarification that they need around any points, then we can raise that. Please bear in mind that it is just simply clarification about any points that Mr. Clark talks about in his 3 minutes. Okay, so I'd like to welcome Mr. Clark, welcome you to the committee. My colleague, when the Democratic officers is going to time you, you have 3 minutes to speak. I am going to be strict around that. And then after that, then committee members will be able to ask you if there are any points of clarification from anything that you've actually said. Okay, so the 3 minutes will start when you start speaking. Okay, so the floor is over to you, Mr. Clark.
Thank you, Chair. Both Friends of the Earth and DIAG wish to be associated with my comments. They endorsed the letter that was sent into the Vale, I think yesterday, although I understand that's been removed from the minutes or from the agenda now.
It has, it can't be considered in line with scrutiny.
Thank you. My submission is that what has taken place is neither independent nor a review. The Vale acted for its self-instructing a barrister. Clients often suffer from subjectivity, and objectivity is often missing in such cases. The officer's report in the papers helps to illustrate my point. The report seems to believe it can continue to deny the project is EIA Schedule 1 development. It repeats the Climate Change Minister's decision in paragraph 74 of the letter sent to me, in which it said, I conclude the development comprised in the 2015 outline planning permission is Schedule 1 development and should have been subject to EIA. In desperation, your report takes a word from paragraph 85, which is 11 paragraphs later. The word is interim, but the word refers to the ongoing implications of the conclusion. It's not a proviso in relation to paragraph 74 or indeed most of the letter. This supports the truism that the lawyer who acts for himself is has a fool for a client. A client will desperately want to prove their argument. Facts can become twisted to suit the argument or material edited out of the discussion. I would submit that the exercise followed was clearly not independent. At paragraph 276, the summary of the Welsh Government's comments is inaccurate, as the Welsh Government didn't say an EIA was not needed. The paragraph on the second page refers to a statutory EIA, which I assume refers to Schedule 10, but goes on to remind the Vale that it must consider the environmental implications. It's perhaps mere whinging that we refer to the fact that others have made similar mistakes. Mistakes are mistakes. Although paragraph 2.5 of the report has a blanket exoneration of all that occurred at the Vale, the report omits the information from paragraph 32 of the barrister's report that tells us, as I set out in the introduction, the evidence I've reviewed is necessarily a patchwork of the decision-making process, and there is no way of ascertaining what may or may not have been said during verbal conversations. The barrister was only able to report on what the barrister was given. There was no access given to officers to explain things. It must be as plain as a pikestaff that a review involves looking at decision-making, but the barrister was prevented from dealing with that basic premise. The Vale apparently did nothing to remedy that basic defect. As a consequence, it cannot be said that the review is what full council requested. A review was called for by full council and invite this committee to consider making a recommendation that it's full council that should debate this outcome.
Sorry, can I interrupt you there? Sorry, did you say that was the 3 minutes up?
Yes, Chair, 3 minutes.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Clark, for that.
Yeah, I finished, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Right, do any committee members have any points of asking for any point of clarification? Councillor Robertson?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I got rather lost during Debbie's explanation of the legalities of what's been happening with this application. But so basically, I came out hearing that there were basically a lot of criticism of various bodies, particularly.
Andy, can I just stop you there? We're looking for any points of clarification to Mr. Clark at this point.
Okay, I'll put it like this. Mr. Clark, do you think there's been...
No, it's not wrong questions or his opinions or views. It's about any clarification about any points Mr. Clark has raised.
Sorry, Chair, what am I allowed to ask?
Any point of clarification about anything you said. It's not about asking his view or his opinion. That is not what this is about. This is about any point of clarification. If you want him to clarify anything he's actually said.
Okay, Mr. Clark, do you think that an EIA has failed to materialise where it should have?
I think that the Climate Change Minister has at last confirmed that that's the case, that it always needed an EIA. The Welsh Government appears to have put its hands up and said we were in the wrong.
Right,
Can I
stop this now, because we are actually asking opinions, and that is not, and I've made that very clear, and if members are going to continue in that vein, I will finish this now. Okay, this is about clarification. It's not asking about opinions or comments. Okay, Councillor Driscoll, I think you had a point of clarification.
I think it was Councillor Bailey, Chair.
Might be.
Sorry, beg your pardon, Councillor Bailey.
Yes, sorry. In the last few seconds when you were speaking, Dennis, I lost part of it because there was a bit of conversation about how much time you had left. Did you suggest? Did I mishear you saying that you suggested that committee recommended for this to be something that's decided and discussed at full council? Was that what you were saying?
Rather than suggest, I think I put it in terms of I invited this committee to consider doing that. I couldn't possibly put it any stronger than that.
That's fair. I couldn't hear exactly what you said. I do actually think that's a great idea. At what point would be appropriate, Chair, for someone to make a recommendation that this goes to full council? Because I'd like to make that recommendation. Debbie's going to respond. I say we're going to open up debate to all councillors, so it's at that point then we can bring that in if that's what I propose. So when we come back to that, then will you ask for a seconder? Because I've already proposed that, if I may. We can come back to it later, but
yeah, I'll second it. Let's come back to it later. Let's deal with any clarification, and we'll definitely come back to that. Okay, Councillor William.
Thank you, Chair. And I was going to propose that it be discussed at full council anyways. I'll happily second what Vince has just said. But on to what I was going to say was that I don't think I've got any questions for clarification of Dennis Clark. but I will be wanting to seek, based on what Dennis has said, I will be wanting to seek clarification from the barrister.
Yes, yep, I'll be bringing all that in now and say that at this point, this is just around clarification. So about anything that Mr. Clark has said, which I don't think there's anybody else looking for any clarification. No, okay. I think probably, Debbie, would it be preferable for you just to respond to any points that Mr. Clark has made at the moment, and whether we need to bring Annabelle in as well, and then we'll open it up then to council. So, but thank you, Dennis, for that, for your input. That's much appreciated.
Thank you. There are 2 points I wanted to just sort of touch upon, and it's just to reiterate the point that I raised when I was speaking to the report, when I referred to, I'm pretty sure I did refer to this, but maybe we can look back on the recording, when I referred to the Minister's 29th of July letter that it's highlighted that she considered the outline planning application was for a Schedule 1 project and therefore would have required an EIA. So I think I did make it clear that Welsh Government, as at the 29th of July, have made that point clear. Yes, if there was any doubt, I've just read from the extract from the letter. The other point I wanted to highlight is that in addition to considering the 10,000 pages of documentation, because it was highlighted in the in Annabelle's paper that obviously that there were elements that I think the expression is the patchwork of evidence that every effort was made to ensure that everything was put in front of the barrister. So any telephone attendance notes and any sort of notes. So everything that was available went in front of the barrister. So just to reassure members that that was the case.
Okay, thank you, Debbie. Right, okay, I'm going to open this up now to all members for discussion. Councillor Bailey, you've got a hand up, or is that your legacy hand?
Yeah, I do. I just wanted to clarify a couple of things there and then make that proposal properly, if I may.
Yeah. Yes.
I think Stefan already seconded me, but so just to clarify what Debbie's just said there, are we saying then that because the Welsh Government is clear now, has acknowledged that they feel that an EIA would be appropriate, should have been, but the reason that the Welsh Government the reason the Vale of Glamorgan didn't make a mistake in its determination through planning is because the Welsh Government made a mistake in advising them back then, not that it wasn't required? I'm kind of confused as to where this comes about, because it's quite clearly said now, and we've had 3 years where we were waiting for the minister to finally decide whether she would force one to be undertaken. We spent a long time waiting for that to happen, but essentially what you're saying is that it should have been undertaken. The Welsh Government now says that, but
Shall I just clarify, Chair? I think I'm highlighting it and highlighting the fact that in 2008 the difference in view, really more to demonstrate, because we're looking back as part of this this independent review, that the position that then was that there was this shall we say difference of opinion. Obviously, we have the benefit of the 29th of July 2021 letter now, but it was just to put it in context, because we are looking back as part of the review, and it was to make it clear what the position was at that particular time. So it was really just for some context.
So we probably made the wrong decision, but there was some justification for it. Is that the gist of it?
I'm just flagging up the fact that there was a different stance from a number of different parties, different bodies. So it's just making that factual point, making that that known to committee.
Okay. Okay. just coming back then to my proposal. This is something that came about because of a motion that I put forward with colleagues at full council. I do think that, as Dennis Clark said, that this should be discussed by full council as it is a response to a motion by full council. And I think that, whilst it's always welcome for things to come to committee, I don't begrudge that. It's good to have people to come and discuss these items. I think the appropriate place for this to be discussed is in full council, and I'd like to propose that this happens. So I don't know if Stefan still wants to speak on that, or whether he just wants to second me. But that's I think that's the proper place for this to be discussed in more detail, I think.
Chair?
Yes, that's fine. Did you want to second that, Stefan?
I do want to second that. I would also like to have a few questions, an opportunity to ask a few questions in the meantime, since it is at scrutiny. But I definitely want to ensure that this is discussed at full council. After all, as Vince pointed out, this was called for at full council, and it should be discussed there.
Okay, that's right. I've got a couple. I know you want to speak in a minute. I just want to double check. Did you want to come back in, Debbie? Because you did put your hand up. Is this something that you wanted to just say at this point?
Yes, thank you. I appreciate it's a motion. It's been seconded, but the report. I've taken this report via Cabinet, Scrutiny, Planning Committee to give everybody the opportunity to discuss the matter. Obviously, if it's the wish of the committee, but hopefully by bringing the report and the reference coming over to Scrutiny, members do feel that they do have the opportunity to consider and discuss the matter.
Okay, thank you, Debbie. Right, Stefan, did you want to come in now and raise your points?
Sorry, yeah. Well, there were a few points I wanted to raise. I don't know whether it's better to raise them at full council or now, but I just believe in striking while the iron's hot. That's all. Basically, it's just three questions, but I need fairly full answers to them. In the report to the committee, for example, it states whether the development should or should not have had an EIA historically was in the reviewer's opinion academic at this point in time. And so I'm forwarding these questions to Annabelle, if that's all right. My first question is in two parts. Firstly, when you gave this advice, did you take into account the requirement for sincere cooperation and what that means in terms of remedying this defect of not identifying that an EIA was needed in the process for this council? The second part of that is, what are the implications of sincere cooperation, as so far the advice seems to suggest that it's of no concern? So that's my first question.
Okay, do you want to answer individually? Yeah.
I think it's easier than me piling on all my questions. I don't want to overwhelm.
Okay. Annabelle, would you be happy to respond to that?
Could I just step in, but just before Annabelle. But at the end of the day, Annabelle's instructions were to undertake a review of the determination that took place and the thought processes and what the officers had in their mind and what they considered at the time. And I think that is very, very pertinent for the standpoint from which Annabelle was considering this matter. I'll say no more and hand over to Annabelle, but I think it might be, I suppose it might be subtle, but we were not instructing Annabelle to give us an advice paper on whether an EIA was required, but I'll hand over to Annabelle.
Okay, thank you. Annabelle, are you happy to respond to the question?
I mean, if I could just give a little bit of background before coming on to the particular point about sincere cooperation, just to set the scene in terms of the issue that's now arisen with it, Welsh Government saying that it's Schedule 1 development in their letter of 29th of July. Just so everybody's clear, that letter post-dates my review. So I did not have that letter when I wrote my review in June. But I did deal with the question of how it had been considered, whether it was Schedule 1 or Schedule 2 development from paragraph 10 and onwards in my report. And I noted that there was always a live issue with Barry Town Council, Friends of the Earth, etc., had made a number of representations suggesting that this was Schedule 1 development. The council considered those representations, and essentially it's a technical question because it's about whether the plant operates as an incineration plant or not, and that comes down to the science of how the gasification process works. And that's why, you know, it does involve an element of sort of scientific technical advice on this matter. It's not really something that a planning officer necessarily would know the answer to without taking advice in terms of the science of it. So the council, so having looked through the documents, the officer's view was that it was not a Schedule 1 development, rather it fell within Schedule 2, paragraph 11b, but the planning officer specifically sought the views of the Welsh Government on this at the time in 2015, and said that the council didn't consider it was an incinerator plant because, and I quote, the application outlines that the technological process does not incinerate the wood waste, but boils off the synthetic gas. So that was the Vale of Glamorgan's reasoning for considering that it wasn't incineration. And the Welsh Government responded the following day saying, although they couldn't provide a formal decision, they noted that the council's conclusion was similar to their own screening decision for the previous permission in 2008. So that gave some credence to the planning officer's view that this wasn't incineration. And so I considered in that context, well, is that right or not? You know, I'm not a scientist, I can't comment on boiling off synthetic gas, but the reasoning of the officer appeared sound, and it appeared to be supported at the time by the Welsh Government. Now, obviously now, 5 years, well, more than 5 years, 6 years later, the Welsh Government have gone back and taken a different view in light of the technology that's being used. But that doesn't mean that the officers of the Vale of Glamorgan were acting negligently or were doing something that was, wrong in terms of their duties. They were acting on the advice that they received at the time. So I looked at it in that context. So I'm not disputing that now the Welsh Government have taken a different view from what they themselves took previously and what the council took. And so ultimately, yes, we may have made the wrong decision on that, but I've looked at why we made the decision and the decision-making process, and the process that the Vale of Glamorgan Council officers followed appears to me to have been well informed. They took advice from the Welsh Government and appears rational. So that's the context for my review on that point. But in terms of the point about it being academic, and this is perhaps even strengthened now as a result of the approach that the Welsh Government are taking in the 29th of July letter. It's apparent from that letter that an EIA or an environmental statement is now voluntarily being submitted by the operator of Barry Biomass. So it's being done, it's being corrected now in any event. And obviously the development is there, but it's not yet operational. And the Welsh Government have considered whether it would be appropriate to issue a discontinuance notice, but in their view, it's not appropriate to stop this development from operating because there aren't likely significant environmental effects. And so that's the whole point of the environmental impact assessment process, is to assess the nature of the environmental effects. And as it appears to be the case that there aren't going to be likely significant ones, the council can be satisfied that there is no environmental harm arising from this development that hasn't been assessed. So that's why, in a sense, it's always useful to look in hindsight at the process that was followed and to say, well, we may have done things better or we may have done things differently. But in reality, in terms of the impact of this on the environment, whether or not an environmental statement was prepared back in 2015 or not, does not appear now to be significant in terms of making an overall difference to the environmental effects of this scheme. So in answer to the member's particular comment about the duty of sincere cooperation, I mean, I assume this is a reference to sort of the European duty to ensure that the treaties are fully implemented and respected, etc. And no, I haven't dealt with that in my report, but I don't think it was necessary to deal with that because I was looking at the process and the procedure, and I was satisfied that officers had done things as properly as they could do at the time in light of the information that they had. And I don't think it's relevant to the question of whether it's academic or not, because I've explained why it's the environmental effects of this.
Okay, thank you. Right, did you have another question, Stefan?
I do have another couple of questions, but I want to come back in on this first. No environmental harm. I mean, what I would say is that I don't believe that this is correct. The European Commission gave advice that gasification is incineration. There was no technical knowledge needed. And I'm wondering whether that advice from the European Commission was considered, because this advice predates the officer's decision on screening and were told about it by Welsh Government. It ought to have been in the papers the council had.
Yeah. Let's not just bear in mind.
I'm sorry, but that's a very important point. And I'm pretty.
I'm not disagreeing. I'm not disagreeing, but just bear in mind of Annabelle's remit around why she was asked to do this report. No, I'm not dismissing it at all, Stefan. Not at all.
Okay. We'll let that one slide for now. But if we go back then to my next question.
Okay.
Debbie said everything was available to the barrister. Does this include access to officers? Were officers interviewed as part of the review, or was it just the paperwork that was looked at?
Yeah, well, as is clear from my review, I was given the files, the planning files. So I reviewed in electronic form the planning files. I did not have any access to interview officers or anything like that. But I mean, perhaps it's a matter for the monitoring officer. But that was my instructions. But I would just say, as a general point, obviously the local authority needs to consider proportionality with these things and the public, cost to the public purse, and there have to be some limits on how much time and resource can be spent in this type of review, and it needs to be proportionate to the nature of it, and that's ultimately was a decision for the local authority and not for me.
I see. So would you have an opinion on would the report, in your opinion, have been better or more thorough if you were given such access?
Well, I mean, you can always go further in terms of interviewing people, but I would just note that a lot of these events took place several years ago, going back to 2015. I don't know if the same officers are necessarily still employed by the local authority. I don't know to what extent their memories would be fresh in 2021 about particular conversations and telephone calls and things they had back in 2015 and earlier. So the extent to which there would have been benefit in having a sort of, for example, the government has an inquiry on COVID or whatever, all sorts of things. And
some governments do.
Whatever, but witnesses get called, and you can go on for months and months and months, and you have, so the extent to which that really would have resulted in any different conclusions, I'm not sure how much further would be gleaned. It would be more likely that officers would be saying, well, I'm just looking at the files and I can see I wrote an email back in 2015 that says this, rather than actually giving any evidence that would have particular value, because it's, as I say, it's a long time ago now.
I thank you for that. Maybe that was a bit of an unfair question. But thank you, Chair. I just want to assure you that I'm wrapping up now.
Yes, please. And can we all just remember Annabelle's remit within this report? Okay, can we just sort of remember that, please?
Yes, of course, and I do bear that in mind. But I do believe that with and I think one thing that Annabelle raised was in terms of how much resource does a council allocate to something. Well, I'm coming from the point of view that I believe that this poses a great threat to the health of the people around, and I don't want them breathing in hexavalent chromium. And so I think that this should be given top priority, and all resources should have been devoted to it. So point 3 was finally, do you now accept that the development was or is an EIA development, and that information might have impacted on your consideration of the screening process?
Well, I don't, as I say, even assuming it is properly Schedule 1 development now, as the Welsh Government say, on an interim basis based on their letter, it still doesn't mean that the officers acted inappropriately or negligently.
I'm not suggesting that.
15. So that was kind of what I was looking at. I mean, ultimately, if somebody at the time had challenged the screening decision by way of judicial review, then the court would have determined whether it was Schedule 1 or Schedule 2, and the court would make that decision. But because that was never done, I can only advise on whether the process was sort of properly considered, and I concluded that it was. I mean, I'd just like to note in the Welsh Government's most recent July letter, in paragraph 93, it says, I note in particular that this is an interim decision in an ongoing assessment of the plant's environmental impacts. The evidence before me shows that the plant is not likely to have significant effects on the environment while an EIA process carried out. Sorry, it doesn't quite make sense. And I've concluded the benefits of suspending operations while undertaking EIA do not outweigh the costs. So the Welsh Government view, when I said, there aren't likely significant environmental effects, I was quoting from this letter. That's not to say there are no environmental effects, but certainly it's the Minister's view that the evidence shows that the plant is not likely to have significant effects on the environment. And as I've said, an EIA is, in any event, being carried out. I don't know what stage it's at now. Obviously, this is in July. We're now in October. So maybe the ES has been produced now. I've not seen it myself, but I just stress those points.
Thank you, and thank you, Annabelle, and thank you, Chair. You'll be glad to know I've got no further questions, but I'd just like to finish by saying that I'm not happy with the final report, and I don't accept the findings as presented here. I think there's still queries and concerns which need to be discussed at full council, which is why I'm happy to second what Councillor Bailey said. And so I would like that noted, and I would like to move that recommendation by Councillor Bailey.
Okay, thank you. I say we've got the recommendation, but I have got a couple of other speakers as well. So we'll come back to the recommendation when everybody's spoken. All right.
Many thanks.
Okay. The next speaker then is Councillor Andy Robertson.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, I was going to ask a question. I don't think we're playing a blame game here. I mean, this is a historic event, the actual what we're talking about, not ancient history, but it's historical. We're not playing a blame game, but basically, I think it's fairly clear that most people now think that an EIA should have been called for at the time. My question was going to be, is there a legal possibility that a retrospective EIA might be called for by the Vale of Glamorgan Council? Annabelle has said that there is an EIA actually being is in progress.
That's right.
Now, is that going to be the same sort of EIA as would have been demanded by the Vale Council? Is it being performed by the same people as would have been called on by the Vale Council? Or is this an independent EIA being arranged by the people at the biomass plant? I mean, there's an important distinction, I think, I think we need to get to the bottom of that one. Thank you, Annabelle.
Okay, well, I think that's a question for Debbie, really. Debbie, would you like to respond to that?
Yeah, I mean, certainly on these technical points, I know Marcus is in the wings. He's not in this part of the meeting, and I know that he probably would be better placed to give an overview in that regard.
Okay, Marcus, could we just call you?
I think Mark. I don't know whether Marcus is with us at the moment, but he was going to have a phone call, so he could pick up any sort of technical points.
Can I just interject? Sorry, Chair. He's not with us, but he can join if members feel he needs to answer the question.
Yeah, I think if everybody's happy, we'll ask Marcus to join us at the meeting as long as he's happy.
Give him a call now.
Yeah, lovely, thank you. All right, just bear with us a minute then, see if we can. If we can't get him straight away, I'll move on to the next speaker and come back to you, Andy, okay?
Yeah, I'm fine with that, Chair. Thank you.
Marcus is joining us any moment, Chair.
Right, okay, lovely. All right, well, probably better, Andy, if you could, once Marcus is in on the meeting, if you could just repeat your question.
Oh my gosh. Okay.
Just because obviously he hasn't heard it, so it'd be better if you can ask it again. All right, thanks for joining us, Marcus, appreciate that. Councillor Robertson raised a question on the EIA and about the independence of it, the one that's being carried out now. So Andy, did you want to just repeat the question that you were asking?
Well, I'll paraphrase. Thanks for joining us, Marcus, and thanks for taking the time. Basically, the question I was going to ask originally was, is there legal possibility for a retrospective EIA to be called for by the Vale Council, given that it's fairly obvious that there should have been an EIA in the first place? Annabelle, in the meantime, has reassured us that an EIA is being carried out. But I just wanted to confirm that the EIA that's being carried out isn't actually being done by the people at the biomass plant, but is something which the officers of the Vale Glamorgan would be happy to back as a bona fide EIA. So if you could answer that one, I'd be very grateful. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Chair. I can try. So, an environmental impact assessment, obviously, rightly or wrongly, wasn't requested for the application in 2015. That followed the advice from Welsh Government as well, which was that it wasn't necessary. The position is that the council has no powers to request a retrospective EIA after a determination is made. So, the powers that actually instigate environmental impact assessment originally came from Europe and were adopted by UK government as part of policy, and they were adopted into a number of areas of law, including planning law. But there is no power to do it retrospectively, if you like, from the council's point of view. So what has happened is Welsh government have considered the position, having regard to current European law and how that sits with UK law, and have determined that a retrospective EIA could be submitted by the applicants. They are preparing or have prepared that and have gone through that process as we understand it. And I would add that we haven't seen this document or had any part in its preparation. That will then, as I understand it, be assessed by Welsh Government as if they were a council. And they would go through the process of consultation with bodies and advise on that as if they were a council. So they would consult environment, the Natural Resources Wales and other bodies who we would normally consult. They will also go through the process we would normally do as a council in taking the environmental impact assessment into consideration, and they will produce a report at the end of that advising on any necessary changes to the application. They also have the powers to make changes and to amend conditions should they need to do so, to take account of any issues that arise. So the process, as I understand it, will be very similar to what would happen if a council was considering an EIA. It's a retrospective process. I understand it's voluntary on behalf of the applicant. They are preparing it, or they have prepared it, I believe, and it will be assessed in the same way, but by Welsh Government, not the council.
Thanks, Marcus. Sorry, Chair. Could I just very quickly come back on that? Very quickly.
Yeah, that's fine.
So will there be any consultation between the Vale, yourself, for instance, and the Welsh Government when the EIA is submitted by the biomass people? Will you actually be involved in the process, or is this something which is going to bypass the Vale Glamorgan Council, which I think, given the circumstances, given the concerns in Barry, would be a bit of a problem?
I don't believe it will bypass the council. It is likely that normally we would involve our shared regulatory services or environmental health, for want of a better description, in terms of any EIA, and it's quite likely that Welsh Government would want to do the same. From a planning perspective, it is quite likely they will consult us, although there'll be very limited input from a planning perspective to an environmental impact assessment. Though the issues picked up by an environmental impact assessment are very usually covered by other sectors of the council in terms of response. But I suspect we will be consulted. I cannot give a guarantee on that because obviously it's a process that will be run by Welsh Government, but it is likely that is how they would intend to do it.
Okay, lovely, thank you.
Thank you, Marcus. That's helpful.
Okay, thanks. Right, okay. Councillor Gwyn John, you had your hand up earlier. Did you wish to speak or raise a question?
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I had my answer virtually answered because I wanted to know more about the EIA. But surely now, that's what has happened over the last few minutes. Surely we should know more about the EIA before we go to full council. That's what I would have thought. Surely we could have the answer from the Welsh Government that's coming through to us before we could consider going to full council. Well, that's what I thought.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I would have thought though the EIA would then have to go. It'll have to go to planning anyway, wouldn't it? If I'm right, Marcus.
The Chair, no. Well, the EIA is a process now that's running completely outside of the planning process.
Right. Okay.
So that's nothing to do with. Essentially, it's nothing to do with us now.
Yeah. Right. Okay then. Okay. All right. Lovely. Thanks. Right. I've got Councillor Bailey and Councillor William waiting to speak again. Is there anybody else, before I bring you both in, is there anybody else who wishes to speak at this point? No? Okay. Okay, Councillor Bailey?
Ruba's just put her hand up.
Oh, right, sorry, okay. Ruba?
Yeah, it's just really clarification, really, and I suppose to Vince and Stefan, really, in terms of this proposal of taking it to full council. We've heard about the process, which I can accept Annabelle's conclusions to that, because I don't think any of us are suggesting that that anybody acted inappropriately, any officers acted inappropriately in this. But what would the purpose be if this can't go back to planning, so this is not going to be looked at retrospectively, so so the actual planning application is not going to be looked at again, which would I assume then would be the opportunity to make your objections, objections known, as Stefan, you outlined. So what would I mean? Obviously, to have a discussion about it, and but what would the purpose? Is there? And I don't know if either Debbie or Marcus can answer this. Is there an opportunity for this council to stop this? To stop the biomass incinerator, whatever people are calling this, from operating? Do you see what I mean? This to me is the important thing. If we know this is a very controversial matter. We know there are not only differences of opinion, but also there's differing evidence about it, about the environmental impact of this. So how do we if you like, change the decision? I'm assuming that's not possible. I mean, obviously, so what's the point of going back to council? Yeah. Obviously, to have another discussion.
Chair, I can answer that, Chair. It's a matter of democratic transparency.
Yeah, but we have had a conversation. Yes, and
this was a report called for full council, and so it should go back to full council to discuss the findings.
Right, can we just talk one at a time a minute? There are other issues already at planning and to do with enforcement as well. So there are live issues at planning. But
Chair,
before,
may I respond to Ruby's question there?
No,
because it also
just a sec. I'm just gonna, because she's asked around about whether it would actually be possible to stop this this incinerator actually operating and being there. So maybe I'm just going to bring in either Debbie or Marcus at that point, just to answer that point, and then we'll come back to you, Vince and Stefan, okay?
Yeah, shall I just jump in initially? And I think, I suppose, and it's natural that the discussion is evolving, and it's useful to have the debate, but of course the main purpose of the report is really looking at what the situation prior to February 2020, and I think I suppose our discussion is going on in a different direction. So it was just to, I suppose, to be clear about if the motion is carried, what is to be discussed at council. I think that's the first point I'd like to make, and I think certainly the referral from cabinet is also going on to planning committee, so there will be that discussion. And I think Marcus has already covered the point that this is now a process which is being dealt with, taken forward by Welsh Government. So just to pose those points, and I'll hand over to Marcus.
Okay, Marcus, did you want to just put some comments at the moment?
Thank you, Chair. Yes. So with regard to Councillor Sivighnam's specific question, clearly there isn't the process that we're talking about, as Debbie has outlined there. There is no process there to stop this, essentially, at the moment. But obviously, you will all be aware that there is an enforcement notice that has been served on the development, which is a separate process. That process would have the power, were an appeal to be upheld, to stop the development. But obviously there is, to use the word process again, there is process to follow to get to that point. We have served, or the council has served, an enforcement notice because of the discrepancies between what was approved in 2015 and what's actually been built, and our concerns around those discrepancies and the failure of the developer to resolve those issues, and the issues around possible lawfulness and other issues which could arise because of that. So that process will take its course. The developer has appealed to the Welsh Government's planning advisors on the basis of the notice being served, and so there is a process there that will happen. An appeal will ultimately take place, or is likely to ultimately take place. So you are essentially stuck in the middle of a planning process at the moment, which needs to take its course. That process will either result in a new set of details being submitted as part of the appeal process, and those could proceed. The decision will be ultimately Welsh Government's again, or its planning advisor through its version of the inspectorate, will make a decision around that in due course. But we are in the middle of a process, so I just wanted to make that very clear that, you know, obviously there's that process has to run its course before there is anything more that could be done.
Okay, thank you, Mark.
Chair, can I just add, because I was hurriedly trying to find the relevant part in the letter, and it is paragraph 92 of the Welsh Government letter, and within that letter paragraph, it refers to, I note the only alternative decision would be to suspend the plant while the EIA process is carried out, and consider that a suspension decision would negatively impact on the objective to support people and business to drive prosperity. Consequently, I consider the decision not to suspend while an EIA is undertaken is a reasonable step. So Welsh Government has considered whether to suspend, and they have determined not to. So that is something which has been considered.
Okay, lovely. Thank you, Debbie. Thank you, Marcus, for that clarification as well. Right, okay. I'm going to try and bring this in a little bit now. All right.
Can I come back in then, please, Chair?
You can, yeah. Did you want to respond then? Because obviously, what is the purpose of actually, and bearing in mind, I think that we're all clear that what we're going to, you know, the recommendation on the table is for this report to be to go back to Cabinet now with a consideration for it to be discussed at full council. So am I right? Is that what you're proposing?
Yeah.
And it's around that transparency and full discussion.
Can I just briefly, very briefly come back in? I understand what's been said by everyone in the last few minutes. It's all interesting padding and background, but it's irrelevant as to why we want to bring this back to full council. The review was commissioned following a nearly unanimous vote by full council, and it was as much about understanding the processes and decisions that were taken as to what action should be taken in the future. And full council, rightly, I think, will want to consider the scope of the report, which is acknowledged by its author to be patchwork. I understand the points that she's made about the resource that she had, and there's a question to be asked as to whether, how far, how deep you go, how strong people's memories will be. But I think that we need to determine whether this was in fact a report that was the report that was requested by full council, because, you know, at that time we asked for the council to introduce more transparency to help provide public confidence in the planning processes. This is a very sensitive issue, and clearly that has to include debating and discussing whether this report meets what we asked for in the first instance, and discussing as a wider full council how we feel about its conclusions. And to be frank, if we don't vote to bring it back, I'll just table another motion myself, like I did last time. So there's really no point in stopping this from going back.
Let's deal with the motion. I understand everybody feels very strongly around this report, and obviously the impact of the incinerator, myself included, I hasten to add. But you know, let's try and bring it onto the table now, the proposal. So I think it's clear there what would actually send him back to actually ask to be put to full council is the actual the report that we got here in front of us.
And
Stefan, did you want to add anything briefly? Because
yes, there's one thing that hasn't been addressed tonight, and that is the difference between an environmental statement and an environmental impact assessment. Welsh Government, please correct me if I'm wrong, but I understand that Welsh Government asked for a statement, not an EIA, and I'd like to know what is the difference between the two. And to support what Vince said, anyone outside of this meeting could be forgiven for thinking that people have been waffling, being defensive and practicing avoidance. And I think in the interest of transparency alone and procedure, insist that this go to full council. Otherwise, people will be thinking that a lot of creative energy is going into covering up mistakes and not actually getting to the truth.
Yeah, just a bit of a health warning around what you're actually saying there, Stefan. Okay. Okay, I mean, Ruben, did you want to come back in at this point? We got the recommendation on the table. So Ruben,
I support it going back to council, because the democratic part of it, I'm completely on all fours with. That's my I suppose my concern was that the purpose, part of the purpose was to kind of somehow, you know, the expectation was that there was going to be some overturning of you know, of an original decision, which, you know, was obviously not, you know, is not part of that process. But of course, you know, democratically, you know, I agree. This is, you know, is something which came to, you know, as you say, as Vince said, you know, came to full council, and it should go back to full council because, you know, it is open to everyone to discuss that. Yeah.
Okay. Right, Marcus, did you just want to come in on that point? I've got Leighton waiting to speak as well, and I'm just really cautious now that we need to bring this in. We've got the recommendation on the table. So, Marcus, did you want to add anything?
Did you want me to give clarity, Chair, on what's the difference between environmental statement and environmental impact assessment?
If you could, yes, lovely. Thank you.
Okay, so thank you, Chair. Just for clarity, the environmental impact assessment, or EIA, is the overarching process which is undertaken to assess the environmental impact of a development. As part of that process, an applicant will produce an environmental statement, which pulls together all the various information and puts it into that statement, which is the document which is submitted as part of the planning process. So just for clarity, they're essentially one and the same thing, although one is the overarching process, the environmental impact assessment, and one is the statement that is produced at the end of the environmental impact assessment to advise on what the impacts are and the mitigations, etc. So does that provide clarity?
Yeah, I think that's. Is that okay, Stefan? I know you were asking around that, and because it is, as you say, the two terms are often bandied about, and is that difference between that. So
I think it's important that people know
that
one is weaker than the other, and that was good to have the clarifications. Thank you, Marcus. Very grateful. Okay.
Just for clarity, they're not weaker. They're one and the same. The statement is part of the environmental impact assessment. They're not weaker. One carries no more weight than the other. They are exactly the same. The statement is the statement that follows the environmental impact assessment.
Right. So one can't happen without the other.
Essentially, yes, they're one and the same document. The statement follows the environmental impact assessment.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, so basically the assessment is the piece of work like that, and then the statement obviously is I'm assuming is that shorter, concise version then. Yeah. Okay. Okay, Leighton, did you want to speak?
Yeah, it's only quickly in relation to the process. So just to clarify, we're voting on whether the report should go back to full council, or we've voted on it to go back to cabinet and then to full council. I just wanted that clarified.
Yeah, obviously this is a reference from cabinet, so we have to send it back to cabinet. That's with the request then for it to then to go back to full council then for full discussion. So that's the process we got from here. Obviously, it's also going to planning as well, and they may very well have the same recommendation. I can't answer for planning. Obviously, they need to look at it, and obviously they'll look at it from planning. Law and issues as well, but so that everybody's clear is that it's come from cabinet, and if we're all in agreement, and I will take a vote on that, is that for this to go, a recommendation to go back to cabinet, that the report is actually then presented to full council for a full discussion for all members. Okay, is everybody clear around that? All right. Right, I think what we'll do then, we'll go straight into that vote about whether we're happy to support that recommendation. I don't know how you want to do this. Did you want, Gareth, is it just as easy, because obviously lots of people have got their cameras, whether if there's anybody who wouldn't agree to that? Or are we all happy to unanimously agree to that recommendation? Bear in mind, obviously, we got planning members as well. Okay. Okay. There's nobody dissenting, so I'm going to take that was unanimous decision, recommendation to go back to cabinet. That the report is then presented to council for a full discussion there. Okay.
Excellent. Many thanks.
Chair, Councillor Driscoll, is it prudent for myself and the other planning members to abstain from this, or?
It may no, because all the recommendation is for discussion.
Yeah, no, that's fine. That's fine.
So
I'm
okay.
satisfied. Yeah, I'm satisfied that no, you wouldn't need to abstain, being members of the planning committee.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Well, thank you, Vince. Okay, well, thank you, everybody. It's been a long item, but obviously there was a lot to discuss, and I think it was very helpful that we all had our views. I'd like a huge thank you to Annabelle for coming along tonight and answering some of those technical questions as well, and for Debbie's time, and also for Marcus's input there as well, which is everybody's all been very useful, and obviously for Dennis for I'm not sure if Dennis is still there at the moment, but yes, he is still there as our public speaker. So thank you very much for your input there as well, Dennis, and for sticking to those 3 minutes. Thank you very much.
Thank you. If you're content, then I won't remain in the meeting.
No, that's absolutely fine. And I mean, everybody's welcome to stay for the meeting who doesn't need to be here, but obviously totally understand you've also got other things to do as well. But thank you again, Annabelle, for your time. Much appreciated. Okay, I'm going to go back now to item number 4, which is the Vale Morgan Replacement Local Development Plan 2021 to 2036. Again, this is a reference from Cabinet. And obviously we had a discussion around LDP. I think it was the last meeting, wasn't it? And obviously this is a different report, which I know Marcus will clarify for us as well. So the format for this one is I'm going to introduce Marcus to take the report. I've got Councillor Ian Johnson, who's very, very patiently waited there in the wings. Thank you, Ian, for that. Who wishes to speak. Now, Ian will have up to 5 minutes to speak. And again, if councillors wish to ask him any clarification, and I do stress that it's around clarification of any points or anything he actually raises. It's not a question and answer session. And then the same process we've just had, then I'll open it up then to councillors for further discussion. Okay, so Marcus, over to you.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, thank you for setting out. This is quite different to the last report. Obviously, that was the last report was the annual monitoring report of how the local development plan was performing in terms of its parameters. This report is quite different. This is actually just seeking authorization to progress the legislative process around carrying out a local development plan review, which we are legally obliged to do as part of the Planning Act and as part of the general process around local development plans. So the report comes basically in 2 key parts. It advises on the 2 pieces of or the 2 documents you have to produce to start a review. That is a review report, which is attached to the report you have before you, and also the draft delivery agreement, which is also attached. Just to really quickly explain what those 2 documents do, the review report essentially reviews how the LDP performs, having regard to all the previous monitoring reports that have been considered. And you'll know that, having had a discussion last month, that generally the monitoring report is favourable as to how the LDP is progressing through its life, and there are no major issues with the LDP in terms of how that is progressing. So the review report identifies that fact, but also makes some recommendations around what should be done in terms of the review of the LDP, and I'll come on to that in a little bit. The draft delivery agreement includes 2 key elements: a timetable setting out how the council will manage the whole replacement local development plan project, and a community involvement scheme, which sets out who will be consulted and engaged during the course of the preparation of the plan during its life. So if we go down through the report, you'll see that there is a reference to the delivery timetable. That's on page 6 of the report, and you'll see that the general timescales there are set out with the stage 1 for the delivery agreement, where we undertake public consultation on that delivery agreement. So we will. The delivery agreement that is included here is not if you like, the finished article. We will carry out a consultation process with various interested parties, and that will then be considered. That will then come back to the council, and then finally, and be considered by the council for political approval or between February next year and March next year, and then ultimately, on the current timetable shown there, would progress from April 22 as our adopted delivery agreement. And then following on from that, as you'll see, there is this process which sets out how we would progress with the actual review and update of the local development plan going forward. So, and the timescales are set out there, obviously, with currently a proposed adoption date for a new plan in October 2025. So you can see it's quite a long process. It's a process which is slightly streamlined from preparing a plan from scratch, but is still, albeit a very long process in terms of delivery. Just to sort of highlight a couple of key issues around it, the draft delivery report and draft delivery agreement will be subject to the 6-week consultation period, hopefully in the autumn, early winter, and the council will consider any proposed amendments to the draft documents following approval, and following that approval, both documents will be submitted to Welsh Government, and the Welsh Government will have 4 weeks to approve the delivery agreement unless they request additional time to do so. And if they do request additional time, that will obviously knock on the timetable I've just referred to above. So it's a fairly straightforward report dealing with items which are pretty much legislative and set out in the guidance that is attached to the legislation, and is just seeking approval to start the process, essentially.
Okay, thank you, Chair. I say that's quite that's a very detailed report, and it does. This is just the very start of that very long process before we get then obviously to 2025, which is some way off. Okay, I'm going to bring in Councillor Ian Johnson, who's been waiting patiently to speak there. Thank you, Ian, for waiting patiently. So you go up to 5 minutes. The Democratic officer will time you, and I will be strict on the timings. The time will start then as soon as you speak, and then I'll ask other members. I'm sure you're aware of the process anyway. Any other members then, if they got any clarification about any of the points that you speak about. Okay, so over to you, Ian.
Great, thank you very much, Chair. I hope I won't take a full 5 minutes. Obviously, we've sat through a very important discussion already, and this is another important point because it's setting out milestones for the future. I do apologise, and it's going to be probably a couple of questions that I hope Marcus will be able to respond to. Obviously, it's a 150-page plus document, so if I have missed out bits of detail, then I'd be grateful just to be have them pointed towards me. This is a very important document, setting out several years worth of work for the planning department. There's just a couple of points that I just quickly want to sort of bring to attention and also just consideration, because I'm well aware that if you don't mention these things during the initial stages, then it's pointed out a few years later that you didn't mention it then. So just a couple of quick points that I just want to sort of flag up. I'm not sure if they're because they're not necessarily omissions. It's just points that I want to make sure are recognised. The LDP, and I say this in the context of the hour and 20 minutes we've just had, that the local development plan is one of the most controversial pieces of council developed policy that we have. I mean, those of us with long memories will remember that in 2012 the administration was changed after a campaign to scrap the LDP, and 700 houses that were due to be developed at Waycott Cross were removed from the LDP, and things were shifted around. We've had other people campaign on the numbers of houses sort of within the LDP. So I have a concern that the timetable here, which in other respects is excellently framed, lacks a sort of democratic accountability juncture. We start this process in 2022 after the next set of local elections, and it's completed in 2025 ahead of the next set of elections. Now, if I was a planning officer, if I was a Welsh Government official looking for a smooth delivery system, that's a great timetable. That 3.5 years, sort of is a very, very good. But I feel I'm pointing out a I just want to raise a level of concern that there is, although there's a great deal of consultation that's there in the delivery plan, in the community consultation, there's no point at which the wider general public have an opportunity to say, actually, no, I really don't like this, and I believe that something else should happen. So I worry that we'll have a very technical process, and that lots of the concerns, which may well be well-founded or may not be well-founded, that will come up and will come forward, particularly in that 2024 year of the deposit plan, that those will be brushed to one side or removed or reduced by technical responses rather than democratic, to wider public concerns. So I just want to flag that up, especially in light of, the debate we've just had on the biomass plants and the planning proposals and wider public concern that I think has reared its head at different points in that. So I just want to flag that up, that although 2024 looks great in terms of let's have lots of consultation on the deposit plan, etc. Actually, I do worry that this whole 3.5-year process doesn't have a democratic juncture at which to consider. Just a couple of other quick points which are really related to alignment of the strategic development plan with the local development plan, and better understanding, I think, is required of where those are going to touch with each other. There are some things that we're suggesting happen on a regional level, such as the gypsy and traveller work, such as regional flooding, etc. But I think we need to understand where that's going to be. And I appreciate that the CJC, the corporate joint committees, haven't yet come into position, and so some of that thing are going to be there. But I do think that's an important part of this process as we go forward. And my final point really is regarding the housing allocations, which is probably the most contentious piece, especially the numbers. Now, last time round, I made the argument in the end of 2017 that our numbers weren't aligned with actual Welsh Government housing projections. What's happened in recent years? Now, there's a bit of this report that's beating ourselves up for not reaching our quite ambitious targets for house building, but actually, as our funding allocations have shown from Welsh Government, and as Stats Wales shows, we have more completions than almost anywhere else in Wales. So what I want to be concerned is, what I want to clarify is how our population housing projections are going to be developed, because our numbers will flow out of that. And what I don't want to see is a situation, and this comes back to the strategic development plan and the regional allocation systems, is what I don't want to see is us building on the basis of additional figures that have come about because we've built faster and completed more and been more successful in doing that. Successful is the right word, than some of the local authorities around us who haven't met their targets, and therefore may well end up, depending on the methodology, with lower future targets. And the way that system sort of operates, I think, needs clarification and understanding as we move forward. So those are 3 points I wanted to make, Chair, and I'd appreciate obviously any comments that Marcus has in his role here tonight. Thank you.
Okay, thanks for that. Before I ask Marcus to respond to you, I'm just going to ask any of the members of the committee whether you've got any points of clarification that you'd like Ian, just to clarify. No? Okay. All right, so Marcus, could you respond to Ian, please?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, so I think I will respond to each of those questions. I'll just start by saying, obviously, this document covers none of the issues that, apart from the consultation issue that Councillor Johnson's raised. So it's not intended to, and it shouldn't do, because it is literally just a report about starting the process and setting out the timescale. So that's the first thing I need to say. So I'll come back to that a little bit later on. But Councillor Johnson raised the issue of consultation and the fact that it seems like a very quick timescale. We have to remember we already have an LDP, is the first thing. And so this isn't necessarily a completely new redraft, and Welsh Government advises us of that. This is a review of the LDP that we currently have to update it to move forward to its next iteration. So in their view and in their guidance they produce, we should not be taking 10 years, for example, to produce it. So the reason this timescale and this timetable has been set out like it has is to meet with the guidance that has been produced by Welsh Government. But I think it's important to note that there undoubtedly will be slippage, because the way these things work, they never something will happen and something will cause slippage. It's just the way they work, and I think, this timetable has been set out. But I'd be very surprised if we actually managed to keep to that timescale. So that's the first thing to say. The second thing is, if you look at page 6, where the timescale is, the bit we're really talking about is stage 1 now in this report. So that's the bit we're talking about. Stage 2, which is pre-deposit, is pretty much where all the consultation will happen, which Councillor Johnson is talking about, and where we need to engage with the public and engage with the communities around our strategy. So if you look, the first thing that happens is there will be a candidate site call, and this seems really this seems quite strange, but essentially what we need to do is, as a council, we are advising this process is set out in law and we have to follow it. We will go up for a call for sites for housing, for industry, for business, and we will get inundated with sites. Almost certainly last time around, I think there was in the order of 1,800 housing sites, and around about 500 to 600 business sites, gypsy and traveller sites. All these various sites, they will be called for, and we will get at them, and we will have to put them into a great big database which we will hold with all the information associated with all of them. So that is put to one side, and then we go on to carry out a consultation on the integrated sustainability appraisal of the plan. Now, that follows us at the same time going through a process of looking at the vision and objectives and growth options, and deciding where we want to, do we want to keep largely our plan as it is now, so focusing on the, if you like, the existing settlements and the main settlements of the Vale, trying to encourage growth in those areas with limited growth elsewhere, or do we want to completely change that strategy? So that process is going to be happening behind the scenes at the same time. And then finally, in April 2023, we will be carrying out a consultation on that preferred strategy. And that preferred strategy may well, for example, stay the same, or it may decide that we could, for example, say we want new settlements, or we could say that we want to focus on a different settlement, just Barry, or we could say we're going to focus on Barry as the biggest town, as we've pretty much done in the current LD. So the process has to run for us to get to the point in 2023 with various consultations happening behind the scene. Then, if that process is acceptable, or sorry, if that process comes to a conclusion and we report to council, there will be a preferred strategy which will highlight how the council envisages the LDP going forward. And then you then apply all those various candidate sites to that preferred strategy, and at the same time look at what demand there is. We will have had guidance from Welsh Government around the various things that Ian has talked about, Councillor Johnson talked about, such as housing numbers, how much employment land we need. All those reports are having to be undertaken behind the scenes at the same time. And then finally, with all of that information and the preferred strategy, we will go out to what was called pre-deposit stage for consultation to the public around, and that will, in that document, highlight the various sites we are as a council or as a planning department promoting, for example, as additional housing land and what have you. And so there are numerous stages there where the public can and other agencies can get involved in the process and comment on it. Clearly, the one where most people will get involved is the stage 3 deposit public consultation, where we have actual plans of sites and allocations and what have you. That will run through a whole process, pretty much the whole of 2024, with obviously a final political sign-off on document as shown in there. I suspect longer than that, but 2024, late 2024. Now there is, I think it's fair to say that, some councils are doing this now. For example, I live in Bridgend, and Bridgend is actually doing this now, and that process is at deposit stage. Their plan was adopted earlier than ours, and they are actually going through this process, and they're in their pre-deposit stage, and they put plans out, and they're actually making changes to those plans now on the basis of public consultation. So it's fair to say that it doesn't always. There will be delays, because it might well be that information comes to light, or information is advised that we change the stance. But just for explanation, I think Councillor Johnson's raised a really good point, but it's probably not for this report. This report is solely about starting the process, I think the concerns that Councillor Johnson's raised are probably they can be noted, and I think they will form part of us trying to take the plan forward. But I think I completely understand his concerns that we need to ensure the public are involved, but certainly that is the role of our delivery agreement, to make sure that Welsh Government are happy and the council themselves are happy that we are involving as many people as possible in the process, including hard to reach groups and other groups, and that they are involved and understand what happens as we go forward. It is quite dry, as Councillor Johnson has said, and it gets quite dry until you get to that fruity bit right at the end in 2024, and that is when everyone gets really interested in the process. But we will be trying through various stages to try and engage with the public and ensure that they know what's happening. After all, essentially, it is the Vale of Glamorgan and the people of the Vale of Glamorgan's plan, but that has to be framed within the context of what advice and guidance is given to us by Welsh Government. So I hope I've tried to explain that as best I can. Councillor Johnson then raised two really good points around the strategic development plan and actually the national development framework or Wales, the plan for Wales as it's now called. And of course, there is no strategic development plan yet. We did as a council agree to enter into the development of one back in just before, I think it might have been just before or just after COVID hit. It was around about that time. That nothing has happened with that because of the various issues around CJCs and the links between the Cardiff Capital Region and the Welsh Government's intention to develop corporate joint committees. So we are still waiting for an SDP, a strategic development plan for the Cardiff City region to even start. So that this plan will be way ahead of that. So in terms of conformity, that's what Councillor Johnson is referring to. Would this need to conform with a strategic development plan? The answer is yes, but it certainly won't be there when this plan. I would imagine a strategic development plan probably won't be ready for production or for consultation even until way beyond this plan's way after this plan has been adopted. So this plan essentially will be developed outside of the auspices of the strategic development plan process. But we do have the National Development Framework or the Plan for Wales, and this plan will have to accord with the terms set out in it. Now that is a fairly general plan and very strategic in level and doesn't really identify sites other than things like the enterprise zone and the airport and a couple of other very big sites. But we will, the local development plan review will have to conform with that going forward. So just to sort of clarify that. And then finally, Councillor Johnson raised the thorny issue of housing allocations and how will that figure be worked out? How much housing will we need going forward? And the answer to that is I can't give him an answer, unfortunately. I mentioned in the previous meeting where I don't know if Councillor Johnson was there, but we had some indication that Welsh Government was slightly changing the way it was looking at that, albeit we are aware that, for example, Monmouth are currently going through their review process at the same timescale. I think they're a little bit ahead of us. They're behind Regen, but ahead of us. They had intended actually allocating more housing in their plan than was needed by virtue of the various figures that were in there, and also there was indicated by virtue of the National Development Framework, and Welsh Government have told them to take it out. Now that doesn't mean anything for us, except that it's quite clear that Welsh Government are looking at what's in the National Development Framework and applying it to local development plans going forward. So unfortunately, this is not the place to talk about numbers really, but I can't. I think at the last meeting I said I hope that we would be getting to a point where maybe the Welsh Government will be looking, and they have made this indication to us, they will be looking at things like north of the M4 for development areas to actually use housing growth as a regeneration tool. We still believe that's very much in their thoughts, but I can't at this point I can't give any guarantees about housing numbers. That will be for this process to run its course and advise us, and there will be time to have those discussions at the democratic political level.
Okay, thank you, Marcus. Okay, Ian, you had a quite substantial answer there to the points you've raised. I mean, I'm happy to propose, from this committee, on your behalf, really, about just highlighting the fact about public consultation and how important that will be as this plan progresses. And I don't think it does any harm to actually highlight that, and then we can keep highlighting that whenever, because obviously this is just the first bite of the cherry around this, and it will be coming back. So I think that is an important point, and I'm happy to make a note of that. And again, we can remake that point, as we go along and things develop and things pan out. So if you're happy for that, Ian, I'm happy to include that in. Yeah, lovely. Okay, I'm going to open it up now to other committee members. So the first speaker I've got is Councillor Andy Robertson. So Andy, over to you.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Marcus. And I think Ian made a very important point there about public consultation. Now, as is not unusual, I'm going to make myself look really stupid here, because my understanding is this is a mid-term review of the current LDP, but it seems to be being adopted in October 2025. My understanding is that the current LDP runs to 2026. So basically, there's not an awful lot of time after the adoption for the instigation of any decisions which are made during that time. Or is this actually the run-up to the next LDP, which will presumably be presented in 2026 and will run for the next 15 years after that, presumably? If it is actually a run-up to producing the next LDP, at what point? I remember when I first became a councillor in 2017, being amazed by the number of houses that the Welsh Government had actually said the Vale had to build. I deeply regret voting for that LDP now. But actually, at what point are we expecting the Welsh Government to give us? I don't want numbers, but I'd like to know at which point in the timetable for the next LDP, which doesn't come very long after this timetable runs out. At what point will the Welsh Government actually inform us what their intentions for the Vale are? Thank you.
Okay, Marcus, did you want to just respond and to sort of clarify points for Councillor Robertson?
Yeah, I think it's relatively straightforward. Although this is referred to as a local development plan review, will be essentially a new development plan, and will run on and extend the life of this plan to beyond 2035. So you need to understand that it's not just a mid-term review as you described it. It will be the development plan for the council going forward. It will be subject to monitoring. And if that monitoring shows it's not working, it then triggers a new review. But essentially, it is the plan. The way the legislation is drafted, although they call it a review, it will be, if you like, the new LDP for the council going forward. So just please take that point. That point is important because you rightly picked out that October 25 is the date that we've highlighted in that timetable for adoption. Were it to slip later, the current plan will still be there because this is a review of that current plan. So that plan doesn't fall away, but obviously there is still this debate that anything in it becomes slightly weaker as the longer it gets away from its date of and the other thing is that Welsh Government did originally have what's called a drop dead date. So the plan would drop dead at 2026 but that they have now actually suspended that, so the plan review process is allowed to continue. But I think as an authority, we would be seeking very strongly to try and get any review completed by what was the drop dead date of our plan, which is 2026. In terms of housing allocation numbers and Welsh Government telling us what the numbers will be, we have to remember that actually Welsh Government don't actually tell us what the numbers are going to be. It isn't actually a command system. England's different. England does do that in many ways. They do spell out exactly what each area has to provide. What Welsh Government does is takes an overarching view of the region and takes a regional approach in terms of what housing numbers might be. That will flow from a lot of the work that's done by the council itself in terms of growth and other issues. And you'll recall the debate last time was around population projection figures compared to growth figures. And Welsh Government's view was that when we originally get a set a figure of around a population growth of around 6,000, I can't remember the exact figure, that should be higher because they envisaged higher growth. And that's how we got to the figure and ultimately of 9,600 ultimately growth in terms of housing numbers. So that process and that process of identifying where we will get to will be the probably the first time that will happen is between April 23 and May 23, around about the time when we're talking about the preferred strategy for the council. There will be a lot of work that will lead into that, and you can see the vision, objectives and growth options will feed into that, because that's at each stage we have to get agreement from Welsh Government that we are progressing. So they do feed into it. But I think I just wanted to stress that they don't give us a figure. They don't say you have to have 10,000 houses or you have to have 7,000 houses or anything else. Our growth strategy will be the thing that triggers probably the numbers that we ever ultimately get to, and that is something that goes through this process, this iterative process of being consulted on and considered. And so ultimately the final figures will be in that public consultation document, which gets agreed in April 24, but flows from the agreement of the preferred strategy in September 23. So it's a process that we have to run through. I have to stress that we still won't be our own masters. Welsh Government can object at any time if they consider we are under-egging or over-egging anything. For example, I gave the example of Monmouth. They were considered to be over-egging theirs, and Welsh Government have raised an objection to that. Who knows what will happen with us going forward? I still hold out the hope that we won't be looking at the same numbers we had last time, but I can't give you any guarantees of that.
Okay,
thank you. Will or Chair, was that a will? You hope that we will have the same or won't have the same numbers? Sorry.
Sorry, I hope that we will have lower numbers than last time. I think that our view, as I said last time, is that the Vale took a lot of housing in the last the current LDP, and I think our view is that we would be looking for probably lower numbers, but I can give no guarantees that is where we will end up, unfortunately.
Thank you, Marcus. Good answer again. I'm still confused. I don't understand why we were under such pressure to build so many houses at the last LDP, why we were being threatened by the Welsh Government with their inspectorate coming in and charging us a huge amount of money. But it's obviously a process which is beyond my capability of understanding.
Okay, thank you, Andy. Okay, Vince Bailey, Councillor Vince Bailey, you're next.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I guess kind of following on from what Andy just said there, a bit of a cheeky question first, if I might. You said the Welsh Government doesn't issue a requirement based on housing, but that is a little bit confusing because you'll recall, well, you'll know better than anyone, that we were very, very clearly steered in the direction that ultimately led to a letter confirming that we had to adopt. And I appreciate that was probably around requiring adopting by a certain date. But if what you're saying is true, does that actually mean that it was Vale of Glamorgan officers who are to blame for the near 10,000 home target, if that's not a Welsh Government jurisdiction? But the other question is, you've talked about the strategic development plan a few times recently, and I appreciate you've just clarified. I mean, that's not going to apply to this LDP. That's something for a little bit further down the line. But there was a lot of discussion at that point when we adopted around the Welsh Government imposing housing targets, or at least based on the projections of housing requirements. And I can recall being assured by the previous cabinet member, but not the current one, that this review stage would be an opportunity to make the case for fewer homes. And I guess so therefore what I'm asking is, what leverage do we have is there any mechanism at any point throughout which we can reiterate the point that we feel we're being asked to build a disproportionate number of homes? And I guess the key question then is, if we do have an opportunity to challenge the number of homes contained within the plan or to change that, when can we start doing that, and why aren't we starting already? Because it feels a little bit passive at this point, but perhaps that's a process thing I don't understand. I don't just want to rubber stamp a whole stage of this without taking some kind of action towards challenging the number of homes, if it's at all possible to do so.
Okay, thank you, Vince. Yeah, was a bit of a cheeky question, but that's fine. I mean, Marcus, did you want to respond? I mean, I am guessing it is, because it is a long process, but did you want to respond?
Yeah. I mean, just to come back, there's two prongs to that question, and I completely understand how difficult it is to sort of understand this issue around, did Welsh Government impose a figure on us or not? So in answer to your question, they didn't come around and say, we want you to have 10,600 new houses. So that's the first thing. They don't do that. But what they do is they say, you go through your process of looking at your population projections. You look at what your house building numbers have been to now. You look at other factors, and you also look at what your economic growth is proposed to be. You will get a figure recommended by, and we employ consultants to do some of that work, and we do some of the work ourselves, and you ultimately come to a figure. In the case of the previous LDP, what ultimately happened was we came out with a figure initially back in the early part of developing the plan, which Welsh Government didn't agree with. They felt it was too low. The reason they felt it was too low was they felt there would be more economic growth than we necessarily attached houses to, and essentially I'm not going to say it became a horse trading game, but it certainly became a point where we were almost going, well, how many do you need? They won't tell you a number. They just say you need more. You look at that, you work out a figure, you put that figure up there. They say that's still not enough. And so they never come, there isn't a process where you get told you need 10,600 houses in the Vale of Morgan for the next 15 years. They don't do that. What they do is they will go through your review and your process and the details you've done around your economic growth and your housing, your population projections, and ultimately they'll come out and they'll say, well, the figures you're recommending, the planners, if you like, based on that, are either too low, too high, or okay. And that is when the shouting, as you've described it, can probably start around what Welsh Government actually say. I think it's fair to say if we had an SDP, a development plan, we probably would have had a little bit more clarity in terms of numbers, because that SDP would go through the process. I think we haven't got that. All we've got is the Wales plan, which is not really very specific at all. Talks about, there are areas it identifies as pure growth areas, and that includes land north of the M4 and Cardiff and Newport. We're in a partial growth area. Monmouth in a, I'm not going to say no growth area, but it's in a low growth area in their view. So take what you like from that, I suppose. But there will be, as that process runs on, there will be certainly time for you as councillors to get involved and to say, no, I think it's too high. You're promoting economic growth at a particular level, and I think it's not going to be that high, or you're attaching too many jobs to that economic growth, or you're not taking account of home working or other issues which are going to be very, very relevant to the current the review of this LDP. I think it's fair to say Welsh Government attached a heck of a lot of weight to the enterprise zones in their previous LDP. So, take that as that's just what they did. I can't comment on that. I'm not going to comment on it, but that's what they did. So I hope that's answered your question. I've tried to sort of get through as much as possible, but anything else, please come back.
It does to some degree. There's just one follow-up, a brief one, if I could. I guess you said quite clearly there about the Welsh Government placing a greater emphasis on their belief that there would be more economic growth. Quite clearly, we've just gone through a huge pandemic, which has been a massive impact on economic growth and indeed housing. More people are working from home, which is going to have an impact on the number of people moving to the Vale to work, because there's no need to change in those instances. I mean, I guess what I'm asking is, we've had a terrible time economically. Surely, if there was something that would make an impact on the number of homes we need to build, that's massive, isn't it?
Sorry, you're on mute.
Yeah. Sorry, I pressed the wrong button. Yes, but I think that process will have to run its course. I mean, who knows as we go forward, we're talking about essentially the actual strategy probably being finally agreed, certainly in 2023. We will be in a much better place to understand, for example, has the current pandemic affected home working to the degree it currently does? Has it continued? Have we seen less travel? Are we seeing less travel? Structurally, I think the economy is changing. So, for example, we know that there is a huge demand for logistics centres across the country. So, what's the government going to tell us we're missing out? We haven't got enough logistics centres. All these sorts of things are going to feed into the whole process, and it'll be as up to date as it can be at the time the policy is promoted. But I can't really give you any guarantees on that, I'm afraid.
Okay, thank you, Marcus.
Thank you, Mark.
Okay, thanks, Vince. Okay, Michael Morgan, you're next.
Here I come. Yeah, well, thank you very much for all that, Marcus. I'm only picking up on the comments that have been made earlier about consultation and perhaps member involvement, and in particular, my favourite subject in all this, on page 14, the council is currently preparing an older person's housing strategy, which I think is very important and has been lacking in previous years. And I'm wondering whether that can be brought forward as perhaps a specific report or a standalone consultation to bring it out of the volume that everybody else has to discuss, because it is important. I think it's lacking before. So is there scope to do that, to involve us as members in the formulation of this strategy from an early stage? Because quite often we're presented with reports when they're quite far advanced. But I think certainly I have things to say about that kind of strategy. I'm sure other members do. So do we have the opportunity to be involved in these discussions at an early stage?
Okay, thank you, Michael. It's a very valid point, and I know it's something that you've raised over previous years around the support in that older people's housing. Absolutely.
I think you will be key stakeholders. That any work that's done around that will obviously involve our housing colleagues as well, but obviously a strategy around the private side of that development too. So yes, councillors will be key strategy. I think what we wouldn't want to do is separate. Well, that's an important issue. I don't think we can there are hundreds of important issues in the LDP, and what we can't do is separate everything out into a specific report, which is discussed at length separately, because we'll never ever get to the point of processing the new LDP, but I can give you guarantees that you will be involved in the process as councillors. We are aware of your interest in that, Councillor Morgan, and I think that's something that we will be taking forward. And whoever's dealing with that particular part, I'll make sure they are aware of that, and you're front and centre of any consultation process that they undertake around taking that particular issue forward.
Okay, thank you, Marcus.
Thank you.
Okay, and I did have Stefan waiting, but I think we seem to have lost him. I haven't got him back yet, so I'm gonna have to leave Stefan. Okay, so Ruba, the last speaker there.
Yeah, just really a comment, really, that in Penarth we've got a sort of a social housing need that it isn't met, and so I think this is kind of going. I suppose what I'd like to see more. Is that kind of joined up thinking. So, in the same way that, Michael just talked about that, sort of a whole older people's housing strategy, and I've mentioned this before to you, Marcus, sort of, within our high streets, these hubs, getting, I know you said that Penarth's probably not going to get any money because we're not one of the sort of priority places. But in terms of creating hubs, for people to work in, because people will be working, more from home, and people will want to move into the Vale because it's a nice place to live. If you want to, live by the sea, live by the country, this is an ideal place. So, in a sense, we shouldn't be discouraging that. But, I suppose what I'd like to see sort of within the Vale, more sort of joined up working, and I'm sure you're going to tell me that that happens already. But I suppose from, say, Penarth's point of view, and I'm being, very specific here, I think that doesn't necessarily play out, I think, for people in Penarth, because I think that, the number of people that will come to me and say, well, I've been, there isn't any housing in Penarth, affordable housing in Penarth, and so that people can't afford to live here, and yet we have been identified as a place that needs the housing. So I'm rambling slightly now, but I think what I don't see is that joined up approach, sort of incorporating, post-COVID now, creating hubs where people can work, creating vibrant high streets, will encourage people, to want to live here and to be able to live here. So it's a comment, really. You don't have to answer anything, Marcus.
Okay, thanks, Ruben. But that's it. We've, the whole report is around just starting this process and putting that, starting that off. I think we've had lots of relevant points here raised, and a good discussion around that. So no, I think all the points that we've raised are worth including. Obviously, will be noted and taken forward. Obviously, further down the process as well.
Just to add to that, Chair, and I think that's really good. I think if the comments of the Scrutiny Committee can be sort of summarised and passed on, I think that would be really helpful.
Yeah.
Just to come back on Councillor Twigham's comments, I think that is a really good point to raise about town centres. The current LDP had a very different focus on town centres because it was written at a very different time when we were looking to protect retail and looking to ensure that there wasn't a change from retail to perhaps other uses, because that was seen as the role of the town centre. That's that's completely changed really at a very rapid pace over the last 2 years. Was started before that, but has changed. And I think it's fair to say that the new LDP or the review of the LDP will have the town centre and the heart of the town and taking that forward will be very, very important to the policies that are in there. And I think there will be much more flexibility around uses, with very much a need to ensure in the town, that they thrive and that they are places people want to live. So just to give some sort of confidence, I'm sure that will be at the very heart of what we'll be looking at going forward.
Okay, thanks, Marcus. Okay, Andy, is this a legacy hand, or did you want to speak again?
No, it's just a very quick one. I'm still being stupid. I'm still being thick. I don't get it. Yeah. Right. For 4.5 years, have I been labouring under the misapprehension that we are actually going to be producing a new LDP in 2026, or I mean, I still don't. From what's been discussed tonight, I get the impression that Marcus is saying this LDP can go until 2035, but I've been thinking for the last 4.5 years that we would have to come up with a new LDP in 2026. Marcus, what's the answer?
A bit of both is the answer, Chair. It is a new LDP. I think it's fair to say Welsh Government legislation calls it a review of the local development plan, but it will be a plan which has a life which runs from 2021 to 2036. It will be the new LDP for all intents and purposes for the Vale of Glamorgan. So the Welsh Government call it a review in terms of a process. And the reason they do that is that they see the old process is probably and I'm not going to dwell on this, but the old process, the Unitary Development Plan, and the plans that existed before were terrible documents because they just died. They never had any life. You never looked back at them. You never reviewed them. You never even considered was it working or was it not working. The whole reason the Welsh Government set up local development plans was that they were living documents that you could review as you went through them and change them to meet the needs of if you like, of the community as it changed. So this will be a new plan, but it will be a plan which has that flexibility that allows you to review, because there will still be this monitoring process that happens after this plan is adopted. And for example, were we to progress, were we not to be going into review now, I think the issue around town centres, which we've just talked about, may have triggered a review of the local development plan, because the change there, the structural change that's happening, is such that the policies in the current plan don't really work. We've tried to get around it by using supplementary planning guidance and things like that, but actually those plans, those policies are out of date. So, but there was no point instigating a review on that because we already started a review. So that's why. But this review will lead ultimately to a new plan. So it is a new plan, but it is born out of the old plan.
And it will still have to be voted through by full council.
Oh, absolutely. It's not just a sort of it goes through this process, and this process is very similar to the old LDP process, just slightly streamlined.
Thank you.
Okay. Right. Well, we've had a really good and positive discussion around there, and I think some very salient points. And yes, Marcus, I think if Gareth can pull those points together, including the point that Councillor Johnson raised around that public consultation, how important that is and how relevant that is, and there's every opportunity that we can. So I think we put those points together. Are we all happy to agree that? Can't see anybody saying no, so we'll put that forward and I'll see feedback then all those points as well. All right, so thank you, Marcus, and thank you, Ian, and then thank you for everybody for your input there. That's a really that was a good discussion, so thank you very much, Marcus. So, and you're welcome to stay if you wish to stay for the rest of the meeting. But okay, right, we're moving on to the next item, which is item number 6, which is the revenue and capital monitoring for the period 1st of April to 31st of August. So again, thank you, Matthew, for your patience there. So I'll just hand over to you. Okay.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, no problem. Very interesting so far. So hopefully I'll continue, but maybe not. Okay, so yeah, as you said, this report is our regular monitoring report for revenue and capital monitoring, and it goes to the end of August 2021, so the first 5 months of the year. The report first deals with the revenue budget, and there's a table, as we always have right at the start of the report, which shows the projections against our revenue budgets. So all our services are on budget, apart from neighbourhood and transport services, which, as most members will know, over the last couple of years has been under budget pressure. And this year we're currently projecting a 1.5 million overspend against that budget, which is to be funded from our financial reserves. So essentially we have the money currently to pay for the deficit for this year, but obviously as we've seen over the last couple of years, it is an ongoing pressure. So that the report then explains the main reasons behind the projected overspend within neighbourhood services and transport, and essentially it's the same reason as the last couple of years. The main pressure is within the waste collection and disposal service. So as we've seen over the last couple of years, big pressures within the costs of treating and recycling. And as members will know, we're moving to the new collection method of source separation, which we rolled out in the Vale and in Barry, and one final phase to go still in Penarth and Dinas. But that is a resource intensive collection method. So although we are saving money on our treatment costs, we do have pressures in resources in picking up that waste. So the report discusses that. The report then goes on to mention the other services. So building services, no issues at the moment, unless we went into a lockdown further in the year. And as we saw last year, that puts pressure on this service, mainly within building maintenance, because a lot of their work's undertaken in council housing, and obviously if you can't enter people's housing, then obviously they can't undertake their roles. and we're not getting income from those staff. And then Marcus's two areas, regeneration and development management, both have pressures in them, but currently on target to outturn on budget. The report then mentions the efficiency targets for this year, and they're shown at Appendix 1 to the report. So the targets aren't as large as previous years. However, with the pressures within the services, especially within neighbourhood services, we are currently struggling to meet some of those targets. However, we are continually obviously trying to think of new areas where we can either bring in income or make savings, and a lot of those areas we are starting to roll out now, so hopefully they will produce savings in future years. Things like in car parking, we've introduced pay and display machines that have got contactless cards now, so easier for people to pay. They can pay by phone, they can pay by coins, things like that. So hopefully increasing the income coming into the council. We've also rolled out charging in Cowbridge and Wyndham Street car park now, so they're bringing in smaller amounts of income, and we're also doing other things to bring in as much income as possible. But those savings, they are still proving difficult to find due to the pressures elsewhere in the service. The report then goes on to discuss the capital budget for this committee, and again the full capital programme for this committee is shown at Appendix 2. Just a couple of some of the bigger schemes that I'll quickly run through, where there's either been a change to the budget or it's potentially a new scheme where we've got new funding for a scheme. So the first one I'll mention is the bus shelter improvements, Lantuit Major. So we've received 102,000 to undertake bus shelter improvement works, and they're going to be funded from Section 106 monies. The next scheme I'll mention, which is one of the biggest schemes that we're undertaking at the moment, is the resource recovery facility at Atlantic Train Estate, so basically a waste transfer station. And we've seen this scheme has been in the capital programme for a few years now, but we've seen the costs of this scheme escalate over sort of the last year or so, especially with COVID and the increase of material costs for the scheme. And we've also had to build in a substantial drainage solution to the scheme, which has pushed up the cost of the scheme. So originally it was £3.6 million scheme. The current estimates are now 7.2 million for that scheme. So we're now going to undertake the scheme in a couple of phases. So phase 1 is looking to spend about £6 million on the scheme. And we've currently got 4.6 million in the capital programme, and we're going to via funding from elsewhere in the capital programme, 1 million from fleet parking scheme we had at the waste transfer station, so we're going to via that to this scheme for now, and also 400,000 funded from capital receipts. So we've currently got the 6 million to undertake phase 1. Phase 2 of the scheme will be constructing barns for green waste and the residual waste to be taken to the transfer station. So while we're still at phase 1, those vehicles will still have to travel into Cardiff to dispose of the waste. But obviously a longer term plan then is hopefully, if the funding is available in the future, that obviously those vehicles won't have to travel into Cardiff. They can offload in Barry, and then obviously the waste is bulked up, and obviously less vehicles then transporting into Cardiff to dispose of the waste. So that's quite an important one to mention. There's a couple of 20 mile an hour schemes to mention. So in Aberystwyth and Peterston Super Ely, and we're funding those with a mixture of Section 106 monies and again funding from reserves. So there's a couple of 20 mile an hour schemes there. There's also members will probably be aware of a few residential parking schemes that have been ongoing recently at Cosmeston, Cowbridge, Landock, Barry Island, and the Knapp. And the cost of these is estimated to be 75,000. And again, these are going to be funded from reserves. We've received coastal access grants of nearly 112,000 for Welsh Government. So that's been added into Natural Resources Wales, sorry. So that's been added into the capital programme. One to mention again, which has been on the capital programme for a few years, is the dimming of street lighting and fitting of LED lanterns. So we've got a 335,000, which we're carrying forward to next financial year for part of this scheme. And this part of the scheme is to do with a lot of the ornamental lighting, so a lot of the ornamental columns, and converting those to LED, which obviously a little more complex than a sort of standard column, and the procurement on that is taking a little bit longer. But we've now converted obviously all the residential areas, and the main road works, the main road areas are almost complete as well. So we've undertaken approximately around 90% of our street lighting is converted to LED. So obviously the ornamental lights then are one of the last pieces in the puzzle then to fully convert to LED. Another really important project then is we are moving 120,000 from the Barry Regeneration Partnership Project Fund to be able to prepare bids for the Levelling Up Fund and the Shared Prosperity Fund. So these are sort of UK-wide funds that local authorities can bid for regeneration projects in their area. So obviously, quite an important pot of money going forward. And then I think the last one to mention is we've had money for Cosmeston Gateway, so improving the look of Cosmeston, the gateway into it. And this is funded from a Welsh Government fund of 122,000, and we've match funded that with around 30,000 of our own funding. So the total project costs around 152,000. So that was a quick overview of the report. So if anyone has any questions, then I'll take those now. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Matthew. It's some comprehensive points that you've raised there, and on some of that slippage. So Gwyn, did you have a question for Matthew?
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chairman. I just wanted to ask Matthew about the 20 mile an hour schemes, 216. Is this money's actually making it a full scheme now, or is it just a temporary still? Because the facilities at Berthin certainly are far, far better than those at St Bride's. St Bride's, for example, I don't know what's happened there. I think that was a temporary scheme. But certainly St Bride's, they go from 40 down to 20, whereas it's completely different in a Berthin. You've got the arrows bringing you down to the 20, from 30 down to 20, and it goes out the other side of the village the same. So I just wondered if it would have seemed to me as if it's in place for a permanent scheme. Whereas St Bride's, I don't know, you're going from 40 down to 20, and I just wondered. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you. I'm not sure if Matthew will have the answer to that one.
I might have to pass that over to Miles if he's aware of those schemes, which I would have thought so.
The chair. Yes, Gwen, they're all permanent schemes. I think that the design is slightly different, but if there's any issues with the St Bride's scheme, then it can be amended. The St Bride's scheme is part of the Welsh Government pilot for 20 mile hours, which they're looking to get some learning from. We're also providing them information from our 2 schemes, but they do look slightly different in design, but they're 3 permanent schemes.
Thank you, Miles. Thank you.
Lovely. Okay, thank you, Miles. Well timed. Okay, has anybody else got any questions? No. Okay, is everybody happy to receive that report from Matthew? Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Matthew. And
thank you, Chair.
On that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, moving on then to the last item on the report, which is the Q2 Scrutiny Recommendation Tracking for 21 to 22 and an updated Committee Forward Work Programme schedule for 21 to 22. It's obviously, this is our standard report, and obviously we're all very familiar with the contents of that. There's not a huge amount to report since the last update in July, but I'll just draw members' attention then to a few points. On Appendix A, in the uncompleted recommendation for the September meeting, there's the consultation on the active travel network. We did have some comments, and these are going to be considered by Cabinet at this meeting, which is next Monday. And then Democratic will keep us updated after that. Appendix B, again, which is a uncompleted recommendation from the February meeting. This is the Natural Resources Wales, where they have agreed to provide presentation, but what we're going to do is hold it in conjunction with the Section 19 report. So it's been penciled in for November. Hopefully, fingers crossed, that will take place, because it has been delayed, but hopefully that will take place, but obviously it could change, but hopefully not. Then Appendix D, which is uncompleted recommendation 2018 to 19, and this is around the biomass plant, which we've had a very full discussion around that tonight. And as already discussed, Welsh Government have indicated that an EIA should have been completed, and we'll reflect on that in the next decision tracking update. So this is just about the tracking changes. So Appendix E then, which is the forward work programme. We've just got one report that slipped for this quarter, which is the Section 19 flooding report, which I know we have been waiting for some time. But hopefully this should be ready for November then, and then hold it in conjunction with the other report or the other presentation. Okay, so can I just ask then if there are any reports that members wish to prioritise, or any suggestions for the committee to look at, but perhaps they could raise that now. Okay, Miles, did you want to just come in briefly?
Sorry, Chair, it's not on this matter. I just checked myself now in terms of these experimental orders. I don't know whether I can come back after they finish this point, because I want to correct my position on that, if you don't mind.
Right, yeah, I'll do that. We'll do that afterwards then. Okay. Andy, did you have a point to raise or question? Andy Robertson?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Thanks, Chair. Very quickly. There's a huge amount of concern in Dennis Paris about the Section 19 report, the delays to it, and some. We've seen some of the provisional report, and we're not particularly happy. I just want to make sure that there's a full complement of questions going to NRW at that meeting. Did you say November?
Hopefully November, fingers crossed.
Yeah, yeah.
But they'll actually be there.
Good. Oh, that's great, because there's a number of concerns we want to raise with them. Thank you very much, Chair.
Yeah. Okay, that's lovely. Okay, if nobody else has got anything, that's great. So I'll just bring that item to a close. So Miles, I'll just nip back over to you. Did you actually want to clarify something?
Sorry, Chair, it's the old saying, I had one job. I've just checked because I wasn't sure whether St Bride's Major was permanent or not, but to be clear, St Bride's Major is a permanent scheme in terms of 20 mile an hour. The experimental orders are for Robertson and Peterson Super Ely.
Right.
I apologise for that. That was my mistake. But yeah, so just to be clear, St Bride's Major, a permanent scheme, and experimental in Peterson Super Ely and the Berthin. Sorry, Gwyn.
Okay.
Thank you, Miles. Thank you for that.
Brilliant. You got that. Yeah, lovely. All right. Thanks, Miles. Appreciate that. Okay, so that's the end of the meeting. Thanks, everybody, for we've had recent long and intense discussions this evening. So just thank everybody for their input within those. And just to remind everybody that the next meeting now is scheduled for the 16th of November, where hopefully, fingers crossed, we should have NRW there and our Section 19 flooding report, which is very much awaited. So thank you very much, everybody, and good night.
Thanks, Chair. Good night.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Good night.
Thanks. Good night, everyone.